Star Walker Studios presents Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast.
Hello, fellow gamer. Welcome to episode 188 of Game Master's Journey. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker. On this show, we discuss the craft and the art of game mastering. I've been running RPGs for over 26 years now, and I produce this show in the hopes that you can benefit from my experience, my triumphs, and my mistakes. Today, I'm going to take you on a tour of the latest supplement for Dungeons & Dragons, Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Whether you're a player or a GM or both, this book has something for everyone. So this is a bit of an impromptu episode today. I got a hold of Xanathar's Guide and I started flipping through it, and right away was very excited and impressed with what I saw. You know, like a lot of you, I'm sure I was paying attention to the information released from Wizards about what we could expect to see in Xanathar's Guide, and I've been very excited for it. And that being the case, I was still pleasantly surprised by what I found within this book. There's quite a bit in here that I didn't expect or didn't realize was going to be in here. Everything that I expected is in here, but there's some extra icing on the cake that was a pleasant surprise. So I thought I would do something different. Now, I've reviewed a lot of products on this show, and usually the way I go about it is I get the book and I read it through a few times and I take notes on it, and I put together a review for you. Now, the problem with that is it takes a while, and usually my reviews come out long after everyone else has said what they have to say about the thing. But the upside of that is that I like to think that my reviews tend to be more expansive and more thought out than a lot of the reviews out there for these D&D products, if only because I take the time to actually read through the entire thing at least once instead of just kind of skimming it so I can get out a review ASAP. So that's what I've done in the past, and it's, you know, it's served us well for our purposes. I hear nothing but good things about the reviews that I do. And that's what I was planning to do with Xanathar's. But as I started flipping through the pages, I got really excited to talk to you about it. And to be completely honest, I haven't even read this book yet. I literally just got it. I flipped through it real quickly just to see what's in it. That's usually what I do with one of these books. First, I just, flip through the pages and just see what's all in there before I sit down and start at page 1 and start reading. And as I was just doing that, I got really excited to talk about it. And it occurred to me that maybe I could approach this product in a different way and do more with it. And part of that is I've did a series of episodes on the Player's Handbook where I went through the Dungeon Master side of the Player's Handbook and talked about the rules of the game. And I've recently started a similar series with the Dungeon Master's Guide, planning to also at some point go through Sage Advice. And so now it only makes sense to add Xanathar's Guide to that discussion. Now, I could continue on the trajectory that I'm on and make my way through the Dungeon Master's Guide and finish that up, and then go through Sage Advice and finish that up, and then go through Xanathar's Guide. But I mean, let's be honest, if I do that, it'll probably be a year or more before I get to Xanathar's Guide, if only because there's so much material in the Dungeon Master's Guide to talk about. The other thing that I've been thinking about lately is I feel like I've gotten a little bogged down in the Dungeon Master's Guide in Chapter 2 on the planes. And that's because I was thinking I would do an episode on each of the planes and really dig into them. And I've heard from quite a few listener GMs that are excited to hear more about the planes. But it's going to take a while to get through all the planes at that rate, especially since I want to pull in stuff from 3rd edition because our information on the planes in 5th edition is rather sparse. And when I first had the idea to go through the Dungeon Master's Guide in detail, what I was really wanting to talk about was all the different variations on the rules and get into the different ways that you can run D&D at your table and the different ways you can customize the game to be exactly what you want. But at the rate we're going, it's going to be a long time before I get into that because it's going to take a while to get through all the planes. But I want to do the planes because so many people have expressed interest in them. So pulling all these things together, I decided to approach all this in a different way. And we've already got a lot of different things going on with Game Master's Journey right now. We've got our regular episodes. We've got our monthly live streams that we do, which are now part of the podcast as well. And we have my series of behind the screen episodes where I discuss the D&D campaign I'm running right now. So already we've got a few different things going on with Game Master's Journey. And I figured, what the hell, in for a penny, in for a pound, right? So I've decided to approach this in a slightly different way going forward. And this is what we're going to do. So Game Master's Journey for the foreseeable future is going to consist of different types of topics or segments or episodes. And we will continue all of these things going into the future. So sometimes these will be segments, depending on how much I have to say on a given day about a given topic. One of these might be a segment, which is to say a portion of an episode of Game Master's Journey, or maybe an entire episode. But the series that we're going to continue on the show is the behind the screen episodes, where I discuss my Hinterlands of Alondria campaign. Those episodes will be labeled as behind the screens episodes in the title of the podcast episode, and we'll have one of the older versions of the Game Master's Journey podcast art, which is the art with the Obsidian monolith flying through space, through the nebula. So those will be the behind the screens episodes. We'll also do the live stream episodes, which are the live stream that I do every month. That was a patron milestone that we hit. And when I do just a general Game Master's Journey live stream, that will have a different older album art with the Obsidian monolith on a planet. Those episodes will also be clearly labeled in the title as live stream episodes. And then we'll have just the, quote, regular podcast episodes that will have the more recent Game Master's Journey album art with the 20-sided die flying through space. And those will consist of a variety of different topics and segments. So the Dungeon Master's Guide episodes, I'm going to now break apart into two different series. One of those series is going to be discussion of Chapter 2 of the Dungeon Master's Guide, discussion of the planes of existence. And right now, the plan is to do an episode on each plane and to discuss each plane, or at least a segment on each plane. However, I don't want to wait to get through all the planes before I start to talk about kind of the more rules and mechanics side of the DMG. So I'm going to start a separate series of segments or episodes on the DMG in which we're going to skip ahead past Chapter 2 and talk more about creating campaigns and adventures and running the game and that kind of thing. So for a while, until we finish Chapter 2, the discussion on the planes, we'll have two different series of episodes on the Dungeon Master's Guide. One of those will be on the planes, Chapter 2, and the other ones will start ahead at Chapter 3 and continue on through the Dungeon Master's Guide. And then finally, I'm going to start another series, a shorter series, in which I'm going to discuss Xanathar's Guide, because there is a lot of great information in Xanathar's Guide. There's a lot of great material for this show to talk about. So the way I'm going to approach Xanathar's Guide is today I'm going to give you a tour of the book, and we're just going to go through the book really quickly, and I'm just going to tell you what's in here. I'm not going to go into super deep detail on anything today, but there's so much more in here than what I was expecting and than what we saw on the product page that I thought it would be useful for those of you wondering if you want to pick this up or not to know what's all in here. Now, this isn't going to be a full review of the book. As I said, I haven't even read it yet, but it is going to tell you what is and isn't in this guide. And then in future segments or episodes of the Xanathar series, I'm going to talk about the new rules for the Dungeon Master in this book, which there's quite a bit to talk about there. And I may even, depending on feedback from you, talk about the stuff for players as well. So if you would like me to go into more detail about the various subclasses and new feats and spells and things like that are for player characters in Xanathar's Guide, let me know and I can definitely do that. But I will for sure talk about the rules side of things. And I might even kick off my Sage Advice series sooner rather than later. I may not wait until we finish the Dungeon Master's Guide to kick that off, but we're going to hold off and see on that because already I've got a lot of things going on and I don't want people getting confused or lost. And then finally, we will continue to have episodes of Game Master's Journey where we just talk about RPG topics and GMing and have interviews with other listener GMs and things like that. And at some point in the series of the Xanathar's Guide episodes or segments, I will most likely do a full-fledged review like I've done for products in the past. But again, that'll be later because I need time to really go through this. But in the meantime, we will have discussion of Xanathar's Guide for those of you that don't want to wait. So it's all RPG related content. It's all, I think, good content and will continue our mission here on Game Master's Journey to improve our skills as GMs. All right, so that's what's coming up in the future of Game Master's Journey and where today's episode fits in the grand scheme of things. So without further ado, let's move on with the show and let's take a peek into Xanathar's Guide to Everything. All right, so today I am giving you a tour through Xanathar's Guide to Everything. So again, this isn't going to be a full review, although I will give some opinions on what I've seen thus far. I have not actually read much of this book yet, but today we're just going to take a tour through the book and I'm going to tell you what you can expect from this book and what's in it, and hopefully help you if you're considering whether or not to get this and you can't get your hands on a physical copy to take a look at. Like some of the other recent books that Wizards has put out, this book has two different covers. And one of the covers is a limited edition cover that you can only get from a game store. The other cover is going to be the cover that you get if you get the book from Amazon, or if you don't get it from one of the special game stores that has a limited edition cover, or if you get it later after the limited edition cover is no longer available. Now, the content of the book is the same, it's just different covers. So as far as just the physical things about the book, first impressions, like all the in-house Wizards D&D books, seems to be same paper, same ink, same binding, all that good stuff. All right, so let's open up the book and let's see what's in here. Now, one thing that's kind of cool is on the title page, on the back side of the title page where you have your copyright information, all this stuff, they do have an illustration of both of the covers for you. So if you got, whichever one you got, you can see what the other one looks like. So the book starts out with an introduction, of course, and a using this book, of course, in case you don't know how to use a book. However, the first paragraph under using this book gives us a little idea of what to expect. It says, written for both players and dungeon masters, this book offers options to enhance campaigns in any world, whether you're adventuring in the Forgotten Realms, another official D&D setting, or a world of your own creation. The options here build on the official rules contained within the Player's Handbook, the Monster Manual, and the Dungeon Master's Guide. Think of this book as the companion to those volumes. It builds on their foundation, exploring pathways first laid in those publications. Nothing herein is required for a D&D campaign. This is not a fourth core rulebook, but we hope it will provide you new ways to enjoy the game. We also here have a sidebar referencing the Unearthed Arcana. Much of the material in this book originally appeared in Unearthed Arcana, a series of online articles we published to explore rules that might officially become part of the game. Some Unearthed Arcana offerings don't end up resonating with fans and are set aside for the time being. The Unearthed Arcana material that inspired the options in the following chapters was well received, and thanks to feedback from thousands of you, the players of D&D, it has been refined into the official forms presented here. So this is something maybe to talk briefly about for those of you running D&D and who are planning to get or have already gotten this book, is to think about what you're going to do with things in here if you're already, say, running a campaign. So for instance, in my campaign, Hinterlands of Elandria, we've just played a few sessions. We just started not that long ago. I have a few players using options from Unearthed Arcana that have been updated in this book. For instance, the College of Glamour for the Bard. I have a Glamour Bard in my group, and he's using the Unearthed Arcana College of Glamour, but now here in Xanathar's Guide, we have an updated College of Glamour. Now, there's a few different ways, of course, you could approach this. You could say, hey, we started out using the Unearthed Arcana version. I don't want to change it in the middle of our adventure or our campaign or whatever. So we're going to stick with the Unearthed Arcana version. Or you could say, nope, I'm switching to the finalized version and we're just going to switch right now. And it's just like if you're playing an MMO and there's a patch and it changes some of your abilities, that's just part of the game. Or you could walk some kind of middle road and maybe, say we're going to use these new things and not use those new things or whatever. But my point here is not to point out the obvious different ways you could approach this, but just to make sure that you understand that you do have a choice as a game master. You don't have to use what's in Xanathar's Guide just because it's, quote, official, and what's in the Unearthed Arcana isn't. So that's really all I have to say about that, is make your own decision. Don't feel like you're forced to do one thing or another. Do what you think is best for your game and will be best for the players and for the game and the campaign overall. And as a GM, that's part of your job is deciding things like this. What's going to be best for our game. All right, so right away we go into some discussion of some of the general things about the game. This is called the core rules. And this is something that I will definitely talk about when I return to Xanathar's Guide, because there's some great stuff in here. But today I'm going to try really hard to just tell you what's here and not go in depth on any of it or much of it, because otherwise we'll be here all day. All right, so now we have Chapter 1, Character Options. And first of all, one thing that's really cool here that I like is they have a subclasses table here, which lists all the classes, barbarian through wizard, list each subclass for each of the classes, tells you what level you can pick up that subclass, and gives you a description of it, just basically a phrase telling you the gist of what that subclass is all about. So for instance, we'll just start here at the top. We have the Barbarian subclass, Path of the Ancestral Guardian, available at 3rd level. Description: calls on the spirits of honored ancestors to protect others. So this, I think, is probably going to be more useful to GMs than players, but this is a really useful table, especially when you're planning a campaign or an adventure, to be able to tell at a glance what all the different subclasses are, what level the characters can get those, because they're not all the same. For instance, warlocks and sorcerers get their subclass at 1st level, wizards and druids get theirs at second, and then a lot of the other classes get their subclasses at third. And I also like the short description of each. This might be useful for a player if you're trying to decide what to play, just to kind of remind you what all the options are. Or even if you're a newer player and you don't necessarily know what all these things are, to give you an idea of what all these different subclasses are, so you can maybe zero in on some that seem especially interesting to you. And I think the more options you have in a game, the more organizational things like this are helpful. So I think for a group that's using Xanathar's Guide, we've got a lot of options for player characters now, and so it's nice to have them all here. Now, my only criticism of this table is I don't believe it has everything from Sword Coast Guide in here. For instance, the Paladin's Oath of the Crown is not in here. So this is an unfortunate side effect, I think, of Wizards pushing the Adventurers League so hard. Because in the Adventurers League, they have a rule where when it comes to making your character, you're allowed to use the Player's Handbook +1 supplement. And that +1 supplement could be the Sword Coast Adventurers Guide, could be Volo's Guide, or could now be Xanathar's Guide. And because of that rule for Adventurers League play, Wizards seems to be concerned about that when they release products. And that's the reason we're given that, for instance, the 2 rogue subclasses in this book, which are the Mastermind and the Scout, or I should say 2 of them, or I'm sorry, I'm tripping up my words here. 2 of the rogue subclasses in this book, which are the Mastermind and the Swashbuckler, are actually from Sword Coast Guide. They're reprinted here. So, that is nice for those out there who for some reason didn't get Sword Coast Guide, and now you have those. But for everybody who got Sword Coast Guide, that seems like a waste of pages right there. But the reason Wizards gave for that is because of Adventurers League and because of the +1 rule. So, personally, I find that unfortunate because, I have no idea what percentage of players who play D&D are playing Adventurers League, but it seems to me that it's probably a relatively small percentage. And it's just unfortunate when it gets in the way of good design, because, for instance, this table would be a lot more useful if it also included the stuff from Sword Coast Adventurers Guide, which you'd think it would. It's an official D&D product. It's the only other player side rule supplement we've really, well, I guess Volo's had some. So it's the 3rd rule supplement for the game, right? And also the Volo's Guide stuff isn't in here. So it would have been nice for them to include those things in this table. And then we get into each of the individual classes. And right away, this is including more than what I expected from what I was told about what was going to be in Xanathar's Guide, because there are the new subclasses that we expected, but there's more in here as well. So let's start out with the Barbarian. So the Barbarian starts out with a section on personal totems. So it says barbarians tend to travel light, carrying little in the way of personal effects or other unnecessary gear. The few possessions they do carry often include small items that have special significance. A personal totem is significant because it has a mystical origin or is tied to an important moment in the character's life, perhaps a remembrance from the barbarian's past or a harbinger of what lies ahead. A personal totem of this sort might be associated with a barbarian spirit animal or might actually be the totem object for the animal, but such a connection is not essential. One who has a bear totem spirit, for instance, could still carry an eagle's feather as a personal totem. Consider creating one or more personal totems for your character, objects that hold a special link to your character's past or future. Think about how a totem might affect your character's actions. And then we have a table where you can roll a d6 and generate a personal totem, something like a tuft of fur from a solitary wolf that you befriended during a hunt, or a necklace made from the claws of a young cave bear that you slew single-handedly as a child. So all of the classes have these kinds of things added in them, which are really just ways that you can flesh out your character based on your class, and really much more relevant, I think, to role playing than anything, mechanical or combat related. But it's just a tool that you can use to add some dimension to your character. And this is really cool stuff. I mean, this is the kind of thing like trinkets that you can completely ignore or forget about. But it's also the kind of thing that if you're building a character and you're looking for ways to do more with that character or to flesh it out in some way, these can be very helpful. And again, there's things like this given for every class. And I don't think we'll go through everything for each class, but I thought we could go through these just to give you an example. So another thing we have under Barbarian here is tattoos. So there's discussion of the types of tattoos you might have as a barbarian, as well as another D6 table to generate a tattoo. Or of course, you can come up with your own. We also have a section on superstitions. Same kind of thing. You have a D6 table to help you come up with one, or you can come up with your own. So this could be something like never trust a wizard. They're all devils in disguise, especially the friendly ones. So again, something else to just help you role play your character, to help you bring some depth to your character and to develop your characters in ways above and beyond game mechanics and combat and things like that, which is awesome. So then we have the new primal paths, which are the subclasses for the barbarian. We've got the path of the ancestral guardian and the path of the storm herald and the path of the zealot. And unless I misremember, these are all things that we saw in a playtest version in Unearthed Arcana. Next, we have the bard. And just like the barbarian with the bard, we're given some ways that you can flesh out your character for role-playing. We're given the defining work. So, and all of these, I think, are D6 tables. So this is something that you're renowned for. It says every successful bard is renowned for at least one piece of performance art, typically a song or a poem that is popular with everyone who hears it. These performances are spoken about for years by those who view them, and some spectators have had their lives forever changed because of the experience. If your character is just starting out, your ultimate defining work is likely in the future. But in order to make any sort of living at your profession, chances are you have already have a piece or two in your repertoire that have proven to be audience pleasers. So you can come up with one of these or use the table. So an example, Waltz of the Myconids, an upbeat tune that children in particular enjoy. Or A Fool in the Abyss, a comedic poem about a jester's travels through among demons. So there you go. And again, I mean, you could use one of these or you could come up with your own. And, this is a great way to flesh out a bard character, right? Instrument. What is your bard's instrument of choice? And not just, an instrument, but something specific. So some of the examples given are an orcish drum or a mithril horn made by elves. So just like magic items in the DMG, we're given tables to generate who created this magic item. Same kind of thing with instruments. A horn made by an elf is going to be different than a horn made by a human or by an orc. And then finally, we have embarrassment. Almost every bard has suffered at least one bad experience in front of an audience, and chances are you're no exception. So you can come up with some embarrassment that your character experienced as a way to further flesh out your character. So for example, when your opening song was your enthusiastic but universally hated rendition of Song of the Forgemus. So there you go. Next, we have discussion of a bard's muse. So where does your bard character get inspiration from? And some of the examples discussed are nature and love and conflict. And now we have, of course, our new bard colleges, which are the bard subclasses. We've got the College of Glamour and the College of Swords and the College of Whispers. And these are all subclasses, again, that we've seen in Unearthed Arcana, but these are the finalized versions. Next, we have the cleric. And the first way we're given to flesh out a cleric character is a temple. So this is something noteworthy about the temple that your cleric character studied at. Something like your temple is said to be the oldest surviving structure built to honor your god. Or your temple is a fortress and a proving ground that trains warrior priests. The next way to flesh out your cleric character is a keepsake, which is an item among your personal gear that symbolizes your faith, reminds you of your vows, or otherwise helps to keep you on your chosen path. Something like the finger bone of a saint or a rune stone said to be blessed by your god. The next way to flesh out your cleric character is a secret that your character knows. For instance, an imp offers you counsel. You try to ignore the creature, but sometimes its advice is helpful. Or even though you can work divine magic, you have never truly felt the presence of a divine essence within yourself. That'd be an interesting thing to roleplay. That's almost like a whole nother personality trait that could completely inform and guide your character's actions and choices through the entire campaign. I love it. And now we have our divine domains. We've got the Forge domain, the Grave domain, and that's it. So only two for the cleric, the Forge domain and the Grave domain. Next, we have the Druid. We're given the treasured item. Some druids carry one or more items that are sacred to them or have deep personal significance. So some examples are a twig from the meeting tree that stands in the center of your village, or a small bronze bowl engraved with animal images. Next way to flesh out a druid is your guiding aspects. Many druids feel a strong link to a specific aspect of the natural world, such as a body of water, an animal, a type of tree, or some other sort of plant. You identify with your chosen aspect by its behavior or its very nature. It sets an example that you seek to emulate. So for instance, oak trees represent strength and vitality. Meditating under an oak fills your body and mind with resolve and fortitude. So this is a great example of a flavorful thing to help with role-playing, but something that a creative dungeon master could use mechanically if she wanted to. So if I had a druid player character who has oak tree as a guiding aspect and maybe finds an oak tree to meditate under before a big battle, maybe I might, as a DM, give some kind of mechanical bonus to that. I mean, it says right here that it fills your body and mind with resolve and fortitude. So maybe that gives you advantage on wisdom saving throws or constitution saving throws or something like that, depending on what challenge lies ahead of the druid that the druid is meditating to prepare for. The DM could give some kind of benefit that makes sense or not. It's up to you. Another druid aspect here is your mentor. So perhaps your mentor was a wise treant who taught you to think in terms of years and decades rather than days or months. Or perhaps your tutor always interacted with you in the form of a falcon. You never saw the tutor's humanoid form. So again, each of these has a table with 6 options you can roll, or of course you can come up with your own thing. Next, we have Druid Circles, which are the Druid subclasses. We've got the Circle of Dreams, the Circle of the Shepherd. So Circle of Dreams and Circle of the Shepherd. And also, this is really cool. We've got another section for the Druid, Learning Beast Shapes. And the cool thing that this does is it breaks all the beasts down by terrain. So one of the requirements for a druid to be able to shapeshift into a specific beast or animal is that they have to have seen that animal before. So as a DM, you might wonder, well, has this character maybe seen this animal before? So these tables are useful because it breaks down all the different types of terrain and tells you what kind of beasts you can find there. So for instance, under Arctic, we've got owl, bloodhawk, giant owl, brown bear, polar bear, saber-toothed tiger, and mammoth. So it's really helpful because, you can say, oh, my druid's a forest druid. Here's all the animals I likely have encountered. These tables also give you the CR of the animal, as well as whether or not it has a fly or swim speed. And again, that's very useful for a druid because the CR affects which animals you can shapeshift into at a given level. And also at lower levels, you're not allowed to shapeshift into animals with fly or swim speeds. So these tables let you see at a glance what animals are or are not available to your character, which is super awesome. Now, again, I haven't checked, but I suspect that these only include animals from the monster manual and don't include the animals from Volo's guide, which is unfortunate if that is the case. But hey, it's better than nothing, which is what we had before. All right, next we have the fighter. So like all the classes, we're given a few ways to flesh out your fighter character, first of which is your heraldic sign. And we're given examples for those. So what your coat of arms looks like. We also have instructor. So who taught your character how to fight? And we've got examples for those. And finally, your signature style, a way that you distinguish yourself from your peers by adopting and perfecting a particular style or method of fighting. So this could be, for instance, elegant. You move with precise grace and total control, never losing more energy than you need. Or effortless. You rarely perspire or display anything other than a stoic expression in battle. Next, we have our new martial archetypes, which is subclasses for the fighter. We've got the arcane archer, the cavalier, and the samurai. Next up is monk. Our first option for fleshing out a monk is your monastery. So something interesting about your particular monastery could be your monastery is high in the branches of an immense tree in the Feywild. That sounds pretty cool. Or your monastery was founded by gnomes and is an underground labyrinth of tunnels and rooms. Next, we have monastic icon. Some monastic orders treat certain creatures with special regard, either because the creature is tied to the order's history or because it serves as an example of a quality the monks seek to emulate. So there are examples given of these. For instance, the owlbear. The monks of your monastery revere a family of owlbears and have coexisted with them for generations. Or the dragon. A dragon once laired within your monastery. Its influence remains long after its departure. And finally, for the monk, we have your master. So this is a common theme. A lot of these ways to flesh out classes include a master or a mentor, an instructor, which is awesome. You know, that's something I always love to use as a player or a DM is, you know, how did your character learn their profession? You know, who was your mentor? So even for the classes that don't necessarily list that as a way to flesh out your character, that's always a way you can go is think about, you know, who taught my character how to be a wizard or a monk or whatever. So we're given 6 different types of monk master you could have had. And then our monastic traditions or subclasses are Way of the Drunken Master, Way of the Kenzai, and Way of the Sun Soul.
This is Matthew Colville, and you're listening to Game Master's Journey.
I want to take a minute to give a quick shout out to the patrons of Starwalker Studios. The support of the patrons makes this show possible. If you enjoy Game Master's Journey and you'd like to give a little back, becoming a patron is a great way to do so. It's because of the patrons that all the listeners of Game Master's Journey enjoy a bonus episode every month, as well as the monthly Game Master's Journey live stream. I'd also like to give a huge shout out and thank you to my Tier 5 patron, Steve. Let's hear it for Steve.
Yeah.
You the man.
Thank you so much, Steve, and thank you to all the patrons. You can find out more about becoming a patron by clicking on the Patreon button at the top of the show notes at starwalkerstudios.com.
Next, we have the Paladin. So one way to flesh out your Paladin is with a personal goal, perhaps peace. You fight so that future generations will not have to. Or faith. You know your path is righteous, or else the gods would not have set you upon it. Another way to flesh out a Paladin is with your symbol. So this is sort of like your coat of arms for a fighter. You know, what is the symbol that your character has taken on? And finally, you could flesh out your paladin with a nemesis. Perhaps your nemesis is a mighty orc chief who threatens to overrun and destroy everything you hold sacred. Or maybe your nemesis is a dragon whose servants dog your steps. And this is a great example of a way not only to flesh out your character, but also to provide the dungeon master with an interesting hook that he or she could use later in the campaign. So for instance, if you chose a nemesis for your character of a mighty orc war chief who threatens to overrun and destroy everything you hold sacred, and I was your DM, I'd probably be coming up with that orc war chief about now and figuring out what's up with him. And you could almost be guaranteed to run into the orc war chief and his minions at some point in the campaign, because why the hell not? And finally, for the paladin, we have temptation. So this is really interesting. So what is your moral Achilles heel as a paladin? What is a temptation that you struggle with? Could be pride. Your deeds are noteworthy and no one takes note of them more often than you. Or perhaps fury. When your anger is roused, you have trouble thinking straight and you fear you might do something you'll regret. So what a great way to add some dimension to your paladin character, something that your paladin struggles with, some moral foible that holds you back. Haven't we come a long way from the lawful stupid paladins of previous editions? I feel like we have. So our new sacred oaths are Oath of Conquest, Oath of Redemption, and that's it. Sorry about that. It's hard to tell which of these are going to have 3 and which of them are going to have 2. So we've got Oath of Conquest and Oath of Redemption. Next, we have the Ranger. Now, I will point out, a lot of people ask about this. Xanathar's Guide does not include the revised Ranger. Wizards is still working on that, and they have said that when they finalize the revised Ranger, that it will be available in some way for free. I would guess as a PDF. So that's awesome, but not in Xanathar's Guide. So it does give us some new Ranger subclasses, but again, these are to use with the Ranger in the Player's Handbook. However, the revised Ranger that showed up in Unearthed Arcana was designed in such a way that you could use it. It was compatible with what's in the Player's Handbook. So I think that you'd be safe using these subclasses with the revised Ranger, I think. But you'll have to look into that yourself. So the first way we're given to flesh out a Ranger character is the Ranger's view of the world. And this is really cool. You know, not every Ranger is the same, right? Not every Ranger looks at civilization and nature in the same way. And this really kind of shines a light on that. So your view of the world could be that towns and cities are the best places for those who can't survive on their own. Or it could be the advancement of civilization is the best way to thwart chaos, but its reach must be monitored. Another way to flesh out your Ranger is your homeland. Perhaps you patrolled an ancient forest darkened and corrupted by several crossings to the Shadowfell. Or maybe you grew up among the peaks. Finding the best path through the mountains is second nature to you. Of course, another great way to flesh out your Ranger is with sworn enemies. So this is getting you to think about, why do you have the favorite enemy that you do? What happened in your life that led to you swearing vengeance against this particular type of creature? So maybe you seek revenge on nature's behalf for the great transgressions your foe has committed. Or maybe you bear no enmity toward your foe. You stalk such creatures as a hunter tracks down a wild animal. And now we have our Ranger archetypes. We've got the Gloom Stalker, the Horizon Walker, and the Monster Slayer. Next up is the Rogue. First way to flesh out a rogue character is your guilty pleasure. This could be large gems or a smile from a pretty face. Another way to flesh out a rogue is an adversary. Perhaps the pirate captain on whose ship you once served. What you call moving on, the captain calls mutiny. Or maybe your adversary is the master of the local thieves guild who wants you to join the organization or leave town. Another way to flesh out a rogue is with your benefactor. Maybe your benefactor is a smuggler who kept you from getting caught, but lost a valuable shipment in doing so. Now you owe that person an equally valuable favor. Or your benefactor might be a dragon who didn't eat you when it had a chance, and in return, you promise to set aside choice pieces of treasure for it. That'd be a cool one for a rogue, right? So often the cliched rogue is a selfish character hoarding treasure from the rest of the party. And it'd be a really cool spin on a rogue to play a rogue who's actually trying to get choice bits of treasure to give to this dragon benefactor, as opposed to keeping for himself or fencing or something like that. That's pretty cool. So we have our new roguish archetypes. Well, some of them are new. We have the Inquisitive. We have the Mastermind, which was in Sword Coast Adventures Guide. We have the Scout, and we have the Swashbuckler, which was also in Sword Coast Adventures Guide. So we get 4 new rogues, but only 2 of them are truly new. Next, we have the Sorcerer. Way to flesh out your Sorcerer or Arcane Origin. Perhaps it's you are the reincarnation of a being from another plane of existence. Or maybe you were made in a vat by an alchemist. There's some weird for you. Another way to flesh out your Sorcerer is Reaction. When your Sorcerer's powers appeared, how did the world around you respond? Were other people supportive, fearful, or somewhere in between? So maybe your neighbors hate and fear your power, causing them to shun you. Or maybe you came to the attention of a sinister cult that plans on exploiting your abilities. Another way to flesh out a Sorcerer is a supernatural mark. Something like your eyes are an unusual color, such as red, or you have an extra toe on one foot. Another way to flesh out your character is a sign of sorcery. This could be something like you deliver the verbal components of your spells in the booming voice of a titan, or you sweat profusely while casting a spell and for a few seconds thereafter. So our sorceress origins or subclasses are the Divine Soul, Shadow Magic, and Storm Sorcery. Next, we have the Warlock. And as with the others, we're given ways to flesh out your Warlock character with your patron's attitude. So how does your patron treat you? So maybe your patron has guided and helped your family for generations and is kindly toward you. Or maybe your patron tricked you into a pact and treats you as a slave. And with all of these, I mean, obviously you could just take one of these ideas and run with it with your character, right? But you could also use them to help you come up with your own unique idea. You know, you read through all these 6 patron attitudes towards your Warlock character, and I bet that either one of these will really call out to you and fit your character, or reading through all these will give you an idea of something else that does. Another way to flesh out your Warlock character is special terms of the pact. So all Warlocks have a pact, but maybe yours has some fine print involved with it. This could be when directed, you must take immediate action against a specific enemy of your patron. Or maybe you must occasionally conduct bizarre rituals to maintain your pact. And like so many of these, there are story hooks there, right? Like if I had a Warlock player character who, in my campaign, who had this special term where they had to occasionally do these bizarre rituals, I think it'd be fun if the Warlock had no idea why he had to do these bizarre rituals or what they meant or if they even served any purpose at all, but that they did serve some secret purpose that I as a DM would come up with. And then that would be a great reveal later in the campaign when the player of the Warlock character finds out what all these rituals have actually been doing. And maybe it's something that the player is not going to be happy about, something cross purposes with what the character is trying to accomplish. Or it could just be something really bizarre. Who knows? Another way to flesh out a Warlock is with a binding mark. Some patrons make a habit of and often enjoy marking the Warlocks under their sway in some fashion. So maybe one of your eyes looks the same as one of your patron's eyes. Or maybe your tongue is an unnatural color. We then have new otherworldly patrons for the Warlock. We've got the Celestial, the Hexblade, and that's it. And we've got a bunch of new Eldritch invocations for the Warlock to keep you busy. Next is the Wizard. So one way to flesh out your Wizard character is your spellbook. So what is your spellbook like? Maybe your spellbook is a tome with pages that are thin sheets of metal, spells etched into them with acid. Or maybe your spellbook is small stones inscribed with spells and kept in a cloth bag. Now these are really cool because a lot of these aren't actual books, but they're different forms a spell book could take. And what a great way to really put a different spin on your wizard character. Next, for the wizard, we have ambition. Perhaps your wizard will prove that the gods aren't as powerful as folk believe. That sounds like a wizard character I'd love to play. Or maybe your ambition is arcane power must be taken away from those who would abuse it. So kind of like the Aes Sedai in the Wheel of Time, and how they're the only ones able to possess objects of the power. So in D&D terms, maybe your wizard believes that only wizards should have magic items. And anytime you see a non-wizard or non-spellcaster with a magic item, you feel like you should liberate that item from them before they hurt themselves with it, of course. Perhaps your wizard has an eccentricity, something like you have the habit of tapping your foot incessantly, which often annoys those around you, or you never enter a room without looking to see what's hanging from the ceiling. We have one new arcane tradition for the wizard, war magic. So I'm disappointed to see there's no lore master in here, but that's all right. I'll keep using the Unearthed Arcana one and adjust it as needed. So those are the classes. Those are the new subclasses that were given. And, I hope you can see that in addition to just new subclasses, we're given a lot more ways to flesh out your character for role playing. So in my mind, this is really just continuing what Wizards started with the backgrounds and the bonds and the personality traits and the flaws and all that good stuff. This is just adding to that and allowing you to add even more dimension and character and nuance to a brand new character. And there's no reason you can't add these things to a character you've been playing for a while too. And some people might have a problem with that and think, oh, I can't add this to my character because I've already been playing the character, and it would kind of kick you out of the story if suddenly my character has this new thing. But don't think about it like suddenly my character has this new thing. Think about it more like my character has always had this thing, but it just hasn't come to light in the story yet. I mean, when you think about it, our characters that we play and that we run as GMs are in, quote, reality, are real people and are complex people. And you're not going to be able, in the time you have at the table when you're playing the game, to highlight every aspect of every character. So it's only natural that there are going to be things about your character that don't come to light right away. Just like in a television show, how you can find out something new about a character, even though the show's been running for a while, just because, well, the story hasn't addressed their family yet and what it's like when they go home from their job at the end of the day. And now in this episode, we're going to address that. So you can do the same kind of thing with your D&D character. You can add some new facet to their personality using a tool like this later and not have it be incongruous and just say, hey, my character has always had this thing about them. So if we're talking about a wizard, I've always had this ambition to become the greatest wizard the world has seen in generations. I just haven't talked to you guys about it yet. Now I feel like we know each other well enough, or we've spent enough time together. Now my character's going to start talking about this. So there's no reason that you can't bring these kinds of things in with a new or with a well-established player character. And GMs, I encourage you to do as much as you can to allow this in your game, and to work with players that want to bring new things in like this, because it's only going to enrich the experience for all of you. The more fleshed out a given player character is, the more you have to draw on as a DM, the more elements you have to use in future adventures and stories, and the more invested that player is going to be in that character. All these things lead to a better experience at your table. All right, now after this, we're given more discussion on fleshing out your character. There's even some discussion on some of what I've been saying about how to use these various new tables and aspects if you want to use them. We're also given some other things to think about to further flesh out your character that aren't so much tied to a given class, but are more universal. Things like, your parents. Do you know who your parents are or not? Parents for half elves or half orcs or tieflings. So for instance, half elf, we have one parent was an elf and the other was a human, the obvious choice. Or one parent was an elf and the other was a half elf. Or one parent was a human and the other was a half elf. Or both parents were half elves. So there you go. We got the same exact thing for half orcs. Tiefling, we've got both parents were humans, their infernal heritage dominant or dormant until you came along. Or one parent was a tiefling and the other was a human. Or one parent was a tiefling and the other was a devil. Or one parent was a human and the other was a devil. Now, it's kind of interesting. This doesn't include the option that one of your parents was a demon, but that's okay. You get the idea, right? You can build and expand upon these as you like. Another thing we're given is birthplace. So you have a whole table here of various birthplaces, anything from your home, the home of a family friend, or a cave or a field, or in the Feywild or the Shadowfell or on the astral plane. So they go from very mundane to very fantastic. Where were you born? Siblings. So again, there are tables you could use to generate this randomly or to give you ideas, but how many siblings do you have? What's the birth order? Are you the youngest? Are you the oldest? Are you somewhere in the middle? All this kinds of stuff. Family and friends. So we have a family table. Maybe you were adopted. Perhaps you don't have a family. Perhaps you were raised at a temple or an orphanage, things like that. We have a table for absent parents. So if you decided one of your parents isn't around, why is that? Maybe your parent died, or maybe your parent was imprisoned, enslaved, or otherwise taken away, or maybe your parent abandoned you, or maybe your parent disappeared to an unknown fate. You notice a lot of these have hooks as well, right? If your parent was imprisoned, enslaved, or otherwise taken away, that could come up in the story. Maybe you get a chance to rescue them or find out what happened to them. If your parent abandoned you, maybe you encounter them later, or your parent disappeared to an unknown fate. Maybe you find information about what happened later on. So a lot of these are great hooks, not only for players, but for dungeon masters as well. We have a childhood home. Where did you grow up? On the streets, or in a mansion, or in a palace? Childhood memories. Some memory you have from your childhood. Something like, I spent most of my childhood alone with no close friends, or I'm still haunted by my childhood when I was treated badly by my peers, etc., etc. Now, this next section is really cool. It's called Personal Decisions, and this goes through all of the backgrounds from the player's handbook and has a table for each one telling you why you chose to do that thing. So for instance, acolyte, we have a D6 table, 6 reasons you might have become an acolyte. Like, I ran away from home at an early age and found refuge in a temple. Or an impassioned sermon struck a chord deep in my soul and moved me to serve the faith. So they have these for all the backgrounds in the player's handbook. So yet another way to flesh out your character. So for instance, sage, I became a sage because I was always an avid reader and learned much about my favorite topic on my own. Or one of my parents or a relative gave me a basic education that whetted my appetite, and I left home to build on what I had learned. So again, you're either going to find something in here that really works for your character, or it's going to give you inspiration to come up with something of your own that really works for your character. We next have a similar table for all of the classes. Barbarian through wizard, 6 reasons why you might have become that thing. So let's look at, I'll just pick one here, druid. I found a place among a group of druids after I fled a catastrophe. Or, I've always had an affinity for animals, so I explored my talent to see how I could best use it. So again, there are players who are never going to use any of this. They don't need this. They can come up with all this stuff on their own. But I think a lot of us will find this very useful to help you come up with ideas and to help you think about various aspects of your character's life that maybe you haven't thought about before. And just by looking at each of these as a question about your character that you're going to answer, by the time you go through all this, you'll know a lot more about your character than you did when you started. So next we have a whole section on life events. So this is a way that you can either choose or generate some important things that have happened in your life. And it's really cool how these tables work. So there's two ways you can approach this, depending on whether or not you've chosen or determined your character's starting age. If you haven't decided on your starting age yet, you can roll on this table and come up with the approximate age you are, as well as how many life events you've had up to that point. Or if you've already determined what your starting age is, you can look it up on this table. So life events include wondrous happenings and tragedies, conflicts and successes, and encounters with the unusual. So you check this table, and basically the older you are, you have chance to have more life events. So for instance, if you're 20 years or younger, you have one life event. If you're 21 to 30 years old, you have 1d4, 31 to 40 is 1d6, 41 to 50 is 1d8, 51 to 60 is 1d10, and 61 or older is 1d12. Now, an interesting thing about this is, these ages, seem to correlate with human age. So, if you're a longer lived race, like say a dwarf or an elf, probably as a beginning character, assuming you're young, you'll have, a lot more life events than, a young human would, because even a young elf has probably been around for 100 years or more, which, maxes out this table. Of course, you're rolling a D12, so you could still roll a 1, right? So some of it's up to the dice. And then we have the life events table that you roll on to see what kind of a life event you had. And after the life events table, there are a series of secondary tables that you can roll on. So for example, one result I could get on the life events table is you went on an adventure. Roll on the adventures table to see what happened to you. Work with your DM to determine the nature of the adventure and the creatures you encountered. So then we go to the adventures table, and I might get something like, you lost something of sentimental value to you during your adventure. Remove one trinket from your possessions. Or you were terribly frightened by something you encountered and ran away, abandoning your companions to their fate. So this is the adventures table. We also have tables for arcane matters, boons, crime, punishment, supernatural events, tragedies, war, and weird stuff. So really, really useful stuff. All right, so next we have a series of supplemental tables that you can use to randomly determine characteristics and other facts about individuals who are part of your character's life. So as you're coming up with some NPCs around your character, like a parent or a sibling or a friend or something like that, you can use these tables to help you flesh out that character. So we have a table for alignment, cause of death, class, occupation, race, relationship, and status. So status might be they're dead, they're missing, or their status is unknown, alive and well, alive and infamous, alive and famous, things like that. Next, we have a section of racial feats. I think many of these, if not all of them, were in the Unearthed Arcana. So we have finalized forms of those. And actually, just looking at these, there are quite a few fewer, I think, in here than there were in the Unearthed Arcana. But we've got quite a few new feats. And that was all Chapter 1, which is character options. Next up is Chapter 2, Dungeon Master's Tools. And this is stuff I'm definitely going to talk about in detail in a future segment or episode. So I'm just going to go through really quickly what's in here. We have discussion of simultaneous effects. We have discussion of falling, increasing upon the falling rules to include handling rate of falling. So for times when you're so high up, you're going to fall for more than a round to determine how far you fall each round. We've got an alternate system for handling flying creatures who are falling, who might be able to take less damage because they can slow their fall by flapping their wings or something like that. We've got discussion on sleep and more information on how sleep works, including how to wake someone up and what will and won't wake up a character, rules for sleeping in armor, rules for what happens if you go without a long rest, and things like that. We have discussion of adamantine weapons. So adamantine armor is given in the Dungeon Master's Guide and what effects making armor of adamantine have. And now we have information for what an adamantine weapon is like. We've got a little discussion on tying knots, and we have a nice discussion here, indeed a whole section on tool proficiencies. And this is something that I think was very much needed. There's a lot of confusion out there about tool proficiencies and how to use them. And so this discusses how to use tool proficiencies, how to use them with skill proficiencies, and then goes into each of the different tools in the player's handbook and talks about various things you can do with each of those tools, as well as providing DCs, difficulty numbers, for different things you might do with those tools. So again, this is something I'll discuss in more detail at a later date. So we go through all of the tools, got a few pages on that. We next have discussion of spellcasting rules. Finally, we have a discussion on observing a spellcaster and how you can determine or not what spell they're casting. We have discussion of invalid spell targets. We have discussion of areas effect on a grid with images to help you visualize that if you use the grid and you're concerned about how to map various areas of effect on a grid. We have a discussion on encounter building. So this is a finalized form of the encounter building rules from the Unearthed Arcana, which I use a lot. I'm really looking forward to poring over this and seeing what, if anything, they've changed from what we had in Unearthed Arcana and seeing if they addressed some of the issues in that system. I hope that they did. So we have all of that in here. Something that they added, which I really appreciate, is a chart of quick matchups. So this goes from character level 1 to 20 and gives you just ballpark what you would use for 1 monster, 2 monsters, or 4 monsters. So this matches one character of that level with a specific monster. So let's take an example real quickly here. Let's say your character's 5th level. You could take on 1 CR2 monster, 2 CR1 monsters, or 4 CR1/2 monsters. And And now after this, we have a whole section on random encounters, including random encounter tables, which is awesome. Now, we do have in, I believe it's in the back of the Dungeon Master's Guide, we have the different terrains and what monsters you can find in those terrains. But those aren't actual tables you can roll on. These are actual tables you can roll on. They break them down by terrain, and they also break them down by level, or more specifically, by tier. So for instance, our first set of tables are for Arctic encounters. We have a table for Arctic encounters levels 1 to 4. We have a table for Arctic encounters level 5 to 10. We have a table for Arctic encounters level 11 to 16. And we have a table for Arctic encounters level 17 to 20. And these map directly to the tiers. So we have a tier 1 table, tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4 table for Arctic encounters. We have tables for coastal encounters, desert encounters, forest encounters, grassland encounters, hill encounters, mountain encounters, swamp encounters, underdark encounters, underwater encounters, and urban encounters. So yeah, lots and lots of encounter tables. Now, I'm pretty sure that these only include monsters from the monster manual, does not include Volo's guide. But even if you want to add the Volo's monsters to this, there's a lot less work involved with that now than there was before, because at least you've got tables for the stuff in the monster manual. Next, we have the traps revisited, which is something else that was in Unearthed Arcana before. So we have a finalized version of that, which gives more discussion on creating what they're calling now simple traps. and has more examples of simple traps for you, and a lot more discussion on discovering and disarming traps. And then we have a whole section on complex traps and designing those, as well as examples of those. Next, we have the Downtime Revisited, which also was previewed in Unearthed Arcana. So we have expanded downtime rules and activities. And some of the new downtime activities are buying a magic item, carousing, which we had in the DMG. This is just a different version of it. Crafting an item, which includes crafting magical items. And in fact, seems to be really... Oh no, this has mundane items too. So any kind of item. Crime, gambling, pit fighting, relaxation, research, scribing a spell scroll, awesome, selling a magic item, training, and all that good stuff. Now I'm wondering, they have a special thing for scribing scrolls. I wonder if they have a special thing for brewing potions. Doesn't look like it. Looks like that's just part of the regular item. Yes. Yeah. Potions are under crafting items. Cool. So we now have more rules for creating magic items, creating potions and scrolls, all that good stuff. Awesome stuff. I'm surprised they don't have spell research. Maybe that's a little too advanced, or maybe it's in here and I missed it, but I don't see anything more about researching a spell, which is to say creating a new spell. We have a section on awarding magic items. So this is a series of tables, and we'll talk about this more in a future episode. But it basically gives you an alternative way to generate magic items. So the method in the Dungeon Master's Guide is a way to completely randomize the magic items that the characters get and just randomly generate treasures while still keeping them, within certain parameters of what the player character should be encountering as far as treasure at a certain level. This system allows you to more hand-pick items, but still stay within some guidelines of what it's recommended you give characters of various levels. So I think it will be really useful. So again, I'll discuss this more in a future episode. Now, here is something that I didn't know was going to be in here that I'm really excited about is more common magic items. So when you look in the Dungeon Master's Guide, there aren't many common items in the Dungeon Master's Guide. There's, I believe, the Potion of Healing is common. The Potion of Climb is common. And then spell scrolls for cantrips and first level spells, I believe, are common. And that's kind of it. So it says here, the Dungeon Master's Guide includes many magic items of every rarity. The one exception are common items. That book includes a few of them, which I think I pretty much just named all of them. This section introduces more of them to the game. These items seldom increase a character's power, but they are likely to amuse players and provide fun role-playing opportunities. And these are super cool. Kind of somewhere in between a trinket and your average magic item. They're more useful than a trinket. They actually do something, but they're not, something that's going to give you a big leg up in combat or something like that. But they're very flavorful and a great way that you can add more magic into your campaign and give your player characters access to more magic without really messing up your power curve and making headaches for yourself later. And also, if you want to have a game where the purchase of magic items is possible, but you don't want player characters to be able to purchase like powerful items, these common items are great items to be able to buy at various places. Also, this section makes a distinction between minor and major magic items, which is used in the alternate treasure awarding system given in here. So it says that distinction between minor and major items is used in the Dungeon Master's Guide, but it's not spelled out. So if you look at the magic item tables in the Dungeon Master's Guide, tables A through E are minor items, and tables F through I are major items. And The distinction is that major items are intended to be handed out far less often than minor items. And you can see this in those tables and how often you roll on the various tables, that player characters should end up with a lot more minor items than major items. So this book goes ahead and provides tables breaking down items by rarity and by minor and major. So we have a table of minor items common, minor items uncommon, minor items rare, minor items very rare, minor items legendary, and then major items uncommon, major items rare, major items very rare, major items legendary. And you see there's no common major items. So that's helpful. And the nice thing is in this table, not only, can you find items by minor or major and by rarity, but the table also tells you what type the item is. For instance, an armor or a wondrous item or a weapon or a potion or whatever, and also tells you whether or not the item requires attunement. And this is going to be really handy because I often wonder how many items my player characters have that require attunement. And this way I can find them more easily. And that's chapter 2. Then chapter 3 is spells. We've got quite a few new spells in the game. So this is going, let's see, page 147 to page 171 are new spells. And they're not all first level spells. I was really concerned that we're only going to get first level spells because they did the Unearthed Arcana with a bunch of new first level spells. But they're spells of various levels. And it looks like most, maybe all of the classes get new spells. Wizard gets a ton of new spells, as does Warlock and Sorcerer. Bard gets quite a few. Cleric doesn't get very many. I don't know why clerics are so boned when it comes to spell selection. They have so few spells compared to some of the other full casters in the game. Druids get quite a few. Paladins get 3. Rangers get a decent amount. And yeah, so lots of new spells. And again, these are things we can talk about in more detail later. If you want to, let me know. Now we have our appendices. Appendix A discusses shared campaigns, which is the idea of having a campaign where various players of the campaign take turns as a dungeon master, and it discusses how to do that. And this is something we can talk about in more detail later. And then Appendix B is character names. And this is a few pages. Let's see, this goes from page 175 to page 192 and ends out the book for us. So this goes by the various races in the game, starting with Dragonborn, and gives male and female names. And these are on rollable tables. So for instance, if you're the DM and you're running the game and you need a name for a male dwarf, you can just roll and get a name randomly, or you can choose. So, I know there's been some discussion on the internet about this because Wizards released a picture of the table of contents on Twitter that I posted in the Game Master's Journey community. And people noticed that there's quite a few pages devoted to character names, and people are saying, oh, well, there are so many places I can go to online to get names for characters. Like some people felt like this was a waste of pages in the book. I disagree. I like having this because, for me, this book is something I'm going to have at the table when I'm running the game. There's enough good stuff in here. I'm going to have this. They say it's not another source book, but in my mind, this is another source book for the game. This is going to be right there with the monster manual and the DMG and the player's handbook when I run the game. So it'll be really nice in a book to have these tables that I can roll on and that are specific to the various races in the game. And I think I will find it very useful. And I think it will also be very useful for players who are coming up with names for their characters to be able to come up with a unique name that fits the flavor of the world and the race and everything. Because I know a lot of us find coming up with the name the hardest part of coming up with a character, whether that's a player character or a non-player character. So I will find these very useful. And I use the sample names in the player's handbook all the time, even though there are numerous online places you can get all kinds of names. So, and personally, I much prefer names like this to, there are places that will like randomly generate names, but a lot of times those names are unpronounceable or sound silly or ridiculous. And at the very least, they don't have any context, right? I talked about recently, I can't remember if it was on the Discord server or in our community on Google+, but I was talking about how, I find naming really difficult. But part of it is because, my names aren't just a collection of random syllables that sound kind of cool together, which I think is what a lot of people who come up with fantasy names are doing. I tend to try to come up with names that have some kind of reason or rationality behind the name, or some kind of history, or some kind of tie-in to the world, or at the very least have a stylistic commonality with other names of that type. So like elven names all sound similar, and dwarven names all sound similar, and things like that. A random name generator is not going to do very well at that kind of thing, and I find them pretty much useless for that reason. And another way that I've looked for names in the past is you can find sites for naming babies where you can filter names based on region or ethnicity, so you can find Russian names or Greek names or whatever. And those can be useful for finding some uncommon names, but Greece doesn't exist in my D&D world of Primordia. So using a bunch of Greek names doesn't necessarily make sense. And yeah, so I at least in my world building, I don't say this is Rome and this is Greece and this is, I don't just recreate places from the real world in my world. So, using names from a certain country aren't really a good fit for me. So, I'd much rather use these names that Wizards has come up with when I'm stumped or need inspiration, than do something like that. But that's just my opinion. So that's Xanathar's guide. We got through it. Took me longer than I thought, but we kind of steamed through the whole thing cover to cover. So at this point, you should have a good idea of what's in here, and hopefully will help you decide whether you want to investigate this further. So as I said at the top of the show, I am planning on going through the DM side of the screen material in this book, the rules discussions and the rules editions. And we're going to talk about that in future segments and episodes. Not sure yet about the player option stuff. So let me know how you feel. Do you want to hear more detail about the player option stuff on the show? If so, what specifically do you want to hear about or not? You can reach me at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. Well, that's going to wrap it up for episode 188 of Game Master's Journey. If you'd like to get a hold of me, you can email me at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter @LexStarWalker. You can also call the Game Master's Journey voicemail number and leave me a message. If your question or feedback is entertaining or enlightening or both, you might even hear your message on the show. That number is 951-GMJ-LEX1. That's 951-465-5391. If you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions for future topics, I would love to hear from you. You can find the show notes for this episode at starwalkerstudios.com/Game Masters Journey, as well as links to connect with the Game Masters Journey community on Google+ and Discord, where you can share ideas, questions, and stories with other listener GMs. If you'd like to support the show, the best way you can help us out is by becoming a patron. You can find out all about becoming a patron at patreon.com/StarwalkerStudios. Check the bottom of the show notes for all the other ways you can support the show, including purchasing a t-shirt or my D&D adventure, The Trickster's Labyrinth, at StarwalkerStudios.com. You can also use my Amazon referral link when you shop on Amazon. You can find all these ways to support the show and more at starwalkerstudios.com/support. I hope you have a chance to play your favorite RPG this week. I hope you have a chance to run your favorite RPG. I'll be back soon with another episode of Game Master's Journey. Until then, game on.
This has been a Starwalker Studios production, your source for quality gaming and hobby podcasts.
This episode's music, courtesy of Cloudwalker, Transboy, Renfield, Stanko, and Ish. See the show notes for more details at starwalkerstudios.com/GameMastersJourney.